Welcome back to Horn Takes. It's Friday. I love Fridays. Usually on Fridays, we're talking a lot about football games that are happening on Saturday. Today, we're not going to talk about any football. It's going to be a different kind of show today. We're going to talk a little bit about the Texas basketball game last night against Creighton. We're going to talk about the NIL. We're going to talk about the transfer portal. And we're going to talk about the college football playoff expansion. All of those are things that are super relevant this time of year or things that are just kind of breaking news. So let's do it, Texas basketball. If you guys didn't see that game last night, really, really good basketball game. Number 7 Creighton on the road at number 2 Texas. Texas gets a 72-67 win. I really feel like where Texas won that game was turnovers and free throws. They were a little bit better than Creighton at not turning the ball. In fact, Texas protected the ball really well in that game, and they shot better from the free throw, from the charity stripe than Creighton did. But it was a good game. It was close for the majority of the game. Creighton kind of creeped out to a little bit of a lead, and then Texas kind of got back in it. Then towards the end of the first half, Texas went on a little run, and they ended up outscoring Creighton in the first half by 5 points. And ultimately, those 5 points were the difference in the game. Both teams scored 40 points in the second half. The shooting in this game was pretty bad on both sides. The field goal percentages themselves were pretty good. I think they were both around 47%. But the 3-point shooting was pretty bad for most of the game. Creighton has a kid named Shireman, big 6'7" kid. Apparently he's a really good shooter. He could have built downtown Austin with all the bricks he was throwing up for probably 85% of the game. Texas shot a little bit better from 3, but not much better. I think they were 21% from behind the arc. But it was kind of cool to just see both of these teams go at it. I thought the defense was really good by both teams. They made people take shots and they made them take the kind of shots that those people don't want to be taking. So I thought that was kind of cool. I don't know a ton about basketball, but I heard the announcer say that several times. And as I started thinking about it, we did have guys, Texas for sure. I don't know a lot about Creighton's team, but we did have guys taking shots that they wouldn't normally take and that are not really high percentage type shots for them. That point guard for Creighton, Ryan Nimhard, he's from Toronto, I believe. That kid is really good. In the second half, they basically just scrapped all their offense, and it was really him driving to the basket. And, man, he made some really good plays driving to the basket. He's good. He's a sophomore. They have that big kid, Kalkbrenner. I don't know exactly how tall he is. He's got to be close to 7 feet tall. He abused Texas last night. He went 9 for 10 from the field. His only miss didn't miss by much. And then the Shireman kid I talked about a minute ago, it was funny. I texted my friends. He made 1 3 with probably, I don't know, it was less than 5 minutes. It was right around 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes left in the game. And again, the game was close. Texas got out to an 11-point lead at some point. I think it was early in the second half. And it looked like the game was going to kind of get away from Creighton. And then Texas went on this real long dry spell where they couldn't get any baskets. And this Shireman kid, again, he's chunking up threes like the whole game, and he's missing some of them bad, like completely missing the rim a couple of times. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, this guy's like the 3-point ace. This is the guy. And then he finally makes one late in the game, and I texted my friends. I said, watch, man, this guy that hasn't made a shot all game is just going to start making threes from everywhere. And he did. He hit I think he hit 2 more threes. and one of them was deep, and he made a really nice sort of fadeaway shot at the top of the key, and that really, him kind of catching fire towards the end there was really what kept the game close, I felt like. But anyway, really good game. Carr and Hunter led Texas in scoring, 19 and 15 points respectively. Dylan Mitchell had 10 points. He looked really good again. His game's starting to develop. He's starting to be more than just this guy that can just kind of out-athlete people. So that's good to see. The backcourt again. The other, Arterio Morris is still struggling shooting, and Jabari Rice didn't look great last night. Although most of the time he looks really good. He did make some key shots. He just wasn't hitting from three. So I'm still high on the backcourt. I think the backcourt is a huge advantage for Texas. They've got so many guys they can just throw at you, and then the other guys are starting to pick it up. I think Timmy Allen had 10 points. Christian, man, I get these guys' names confused. Christian, whatever his name is, he's actually a transfer from Creighton. He made some key buckets at some key times. So overall, really good game. I don't know which Texas team we really have. Do we have the Texas team that is going to start making a lot of shots? Because there was a point in that game where Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter were just draining them. And again, neither one of them's percentage was good, and overall the percentage was terrible. But there was a point in time, like Marcus Carr almost seems like one of those guys that he just has to keep shooting no matter what. And eventually he'll start draining them. So I don't know. I don't know if we've got a team that can consistently beat people with the long shots. We'll have to keep seeing how the season goes. But the good news is, even while not having just a really great offensive night, the defense carried the team, and they were able to make plays late to win that game. So I think now I'm always cautiously optimistic when Texas does anything good early in any season, just because I've seen them, play well and then kind of peter off, not do as well. But I think I'm starting to believe that this is a Texas team that can make a pretty deep run in the tournament and maybe even get it done. I haven't seen Houston play, and I don't watch a lot of different college basketball, but until later on in the season. But we'll see. NIL. Let's talk about that for a little bit. For those of you that don't know, NIL stands for name, image, and likeness, and it's basically just a way to start paying players. So the argument has always been it's a $1 billion industry. These schools are making all this money. The coaches are making all this money. Third parties to the whole thing are making all this money through jersey sales and shirt sales and, whatever else, autograph sales. But there wasn't a mechanism to get any money into the players' pockets, which I agree is a problem. And then along came NIL. And basically it's like it's completely gone beyond what I think the intent was for NIL. Now NIL is a recruiting tool now. I mean, you've got these organizations at all the major schools. I know Texas has one, and I'm sure most places have them. Like these organizations that just their sole intent is to raise money for NIL deals for players. And so we'll talk about the transfer portal in a minute, and I think a lot like the transfer portal, NIL has gone way past the intent of what it was designed to do. It's kind of like, I'm not trying to get political at all, but it's kind of like unions. When unions first started, there was an actual real need for some sort of organization and some sort of group to kind of stick up for workers and make sure they weren't being treated unfairly. But now unions are just a big money grab. And so we've quickly gone from the intent, which is, hey, why should EA Sports be able to sell a game with these guys' numbers on it and make millions and millions of dollars, and they can't even get any piece of that pie at all? Why can't Xavier Worthy go sell his autograph on a football and make like $50. Like, what's the problem with it? It's gone from that to like just this massive, almost recruiting tool. So obviously with that, the NIL changes recruiting tremendously. You've got guys that are committing, decommitting, committing, decommitting, committing, decommitting, and then all of a sudden they end up at the place where they're going to get paid the most. And not that guys didn't decommit before, and you always had the guys that for whatever reason couldn't make up their mind. But you've got like parents openly talking about where they're going to get the biggest bag from. And so not only now as a head football coach are you recruiting a player and you're having to talk about, here's what the school can offer you. Here's what our program can offer you. Here's like all the facilities that we're building. Here's all the programs that we have for our student athletes to make sure they're doing well in school, to make sure they have the best nutrition, to make sure they have the best opportunity to not only excel on the field but off the field. Now these guys got to figure out how they can get players money that haven't even come yet, which I realize is totally 100%, as far as my understanding goes, illegal. It's a violation. It's a violation, from my understanding, for a player that hasn't even stepped foot on campus to be given any sort of assurance that they'll make this much money or that much money or they'll get this car or that truck or whatever. But I think that goes on pretty heavily across the country. There's really no sort of oversight on NIL whatsoever. They said, let's do it, but nobody said, well, how do we manage it? How do we have some sort of oversight on this whole system? And now they're just now kind of thing. It's kind of like the internet. The internet came along and they're like, bam, the internet's awesome. Let's do it. Well, now there's all these legal challenges with the internet. And we're talking 20 years later, 15 years later, we're still talking about all these challenges with the internet. When a transaction occurs on the internet, does it technically occur in the state where that person instigated that transaction, or does it occur in some magical land called cyberspace? Just an example of how people have these great ideas and they throw them out there, and there's no thought put into like, how are we going to regulate this in any way? I think not only does it change like recruiting players to come to your school, but it also changes player retention. That's kind of been a thing coaches have never had to worry about before NIL and before the transfer portal. They've had to worry about it a little bit, but they haven't had to worry about it near to the degree that they have to today. Getting them on campus now is half the job. If you really want to keep them, you got to figure out a way to keep them on campus. A perfect example of the NIL sort of playing into this, there was a lot of rumors last year about Xavier Worthy, wanting to move on, go to USC. And a lot of the rumor sort of was encapsulated by the fact of, USC wants to offer him all this money to come play football there. They're lining up all these NIL deals for him to go play football there. And I'm sure there's hundreds and hundreds of other examples. That's just one that obviously I'm familiar with. Same thing right after the season this year. All these rumors start popping up about Xavier Worthy and him, possibly moving on to USC. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if, kind of like how agents float head coaches' names for other head coaching jobs so they can get extensions at their current job. You're starting to see these players. They're doing the same type of stuff. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and enter the portal. They're all announcing on Twitter like a week ahead of time that I'm going to enter the portal. I intend to enter the portal. A lot of them probably have no intention of leaving. They're just trying to see if they can get something extra, something they weren't getting before at their current school. I'm talking about all this from like a fan perspective. I have no inside knowledge of exactly how NIL works. I don't know. I don't know if like player A goes in and sits down in Coach B's office and says, "Hey, Coach, I want some more money. Can you try to help me get me some more money?" I don't know anything about that. So if anybody out there has any kind of, maybe you've got kids that are in the sports in college, maybe you've got a nephew, or maybe yourself, you've played and been a part of NIL and Transfer Portal. Any kind of insight you could give us into that, I think would be great. Just for everybody to have a better understanding of really what goes on. So yeah, all I know is this is the perception of NIL, and all I can do is speak from my perception of NIL. Another interesting thing about NIL is, a few years ago, players that maybe got an okay draft grade, or maybe they didn't, maybe they got, man, you might be a late round pick or you might be a free agent. We really don't know. Do those types of guys start to stay now, and can colleges entice them to stay through NIL deals? Some of these guys are making a lot of money in the NIL business. So does it make sense to stay and maybe get my degree and get paid, as opposed to not knowing exactly where I'm going to go in the NFL draft, or even if I am going to go in the NFL draft? Does it make sense for me to stay here now and get paid guaranteed? Or does it make sense for me to jump to the NFL, maybe get on a team for a few weeks, and then maybe get cut, and then maybe not get picked up anywhere else? It's interesting. I think you're going to start to see these guys that maybe aren't for sure day one and day two type guys that would normally jump. I think you'll start to see some of them stay, because I think some of those schools will put together, they'll figure out a way to get them an NIL deal to get them to stay. So there's a lot of negatives, I think, to NIL. And obviously, I think there's positive. I think that's great for a guy that maybe he doesn't know. He doesn't have to make that decision. He doesn't have to take that next step without knowing what's going on. He can stay where he's at, maybe finish his degree, which is valuable, and he can get paid for it. Let me know what you guys think about the NIL and my take on the NIL. I'm open to that I just don't understand it. It's possible. Transfer portal. I think the intent of the transfer portal was, I think the original intent and the original complaint was, I'm a student athlete. I go to school A because I like this coach or I like this coaching staff. And that coach can just turn around the next year and be gone. And there's really no consequences for him. And now I'm stuck in a position where I'm at a place maybe I really didn't like as much, but I really like the coaching staff or a member of the coaching staff. And now that person's gone. And he can leave and go coach next year, but I've got to stay here and play. And if I want to leave, I have to sit out a year. So for me, that was like kind of the original discussion that led to the transfer portal. Much like the NIL, I think we're way past that. The NCAA guarantees everybody one transfer through the portal without having to sit out a year, which I'm cool with. But I think it's gone well beyond that now. You've got freshmen that show up, they don't get to play, they immediately jump into the portal. There's like almost zero appetite anymore for these guys to sit there and develop and kind of wait their turn. And I think that's always been there, but again, they didn't have that recourse. The transfer portal wasn't there. They didn't have a way to say, well, if I'm not going to play here, I'm going to go somewhere else. I think it's really changed college football. It's really changed. I mean, used to there kind of used to be like this, a guy would sign with a school and he was a Longhorn, or he was an Aggie, or he was a Crimson Tide, or an LSU Tiger. There's almost like this sense now that loyalty is gone. And to me, that makes it feel a lot like NFL free agency to me. And one of the things I really like about college football is that piece where you're a Texas Longhorn or you're whatever you are. And now what we're starting to see is a lot of these guys are essentially mercenaries. They're looking for the place they can go and get the most money. I mean, you got guys like Caleb Williams, for example. And I'm sure there were other reasons he left Oklahoma. I'm not suggesting that, money was the only reason he left Oklahoma. But you've got starters in key positions at major schools that are just completely jumping ship and going to other schools. And the rumor, and my understanding of it all, is a lot of it has to do with NIL money. I think we've solved the problem of guy that wanted to play for so-and-so. And maybe he went to a school that, he liked it, but it wouldn't have been his first choice, but he really liked Coach A. We solved the problem of him going there and then Coach A bouncing on him in a year or two or whatever, and then him not having any recourse to do the same. We solved that problem, but I think, again, kind of like the NIL, we've kind of gone way on the other side of this spectrum, and we've caused more problems because there's no regulation of it. There's no rules to go along with it. It's really simple. There's this portal. You get one time where you can jump into it and go to another school, and after that, if you want to do it, you can do it as many times as you want, but you got to sit out a year. And technically, you can't do it as many times as you want. The NCAA says you have 4 years to play you have 5 years to play 4 years of eligibility. And those rules may have changed. I know there was a COVID year that got added, and there's obviously a medical redshirt year that people can take. So really, you have 6 years to play 4 years. I think the transfer portal, again, has made coaches' jobs harder. And it's kind of a two-way street there, too. I think, today you're not only having to recruit the kid to come, you're having to recruit him to stay because he can just jump at any time. Kind of where I feel like we've really had a lack of regulation is like there's no contract aspect for it for the players at all. They sign a letter of intent that says I'm going to go to school to play here, and there's like no consequence to breaking that contract. And again, I think there's good reasons why they should be able to do that. I'm not negative on any of these things. I just think there's things that the college football world needs to think about and needs to start discussing and start figuring out before they really ruin the sport. I mean, me personally, I don't want to see NFL light. I don't want to see a minor league for guys that are trying to make it to the NFL. To me, it's not just the football for me that makes college football exciting. There's a lot of conversation about, with the transfer portal, coaches should be able to rebuild their rosters and sort of create like these super team type deals. And it should lead to quicker rebuilds or even just, just turning over the roster, like, more and more like the NFL. An NFL team says, oh, man, we really need help on the offensive line. They can go out in free agency and the draft and get players. And, in a year, you can literally make a crappy offensive line one of the best offensive lines in the country or in the NFL. So there's all this talk about that. And I think to an extent that's true. I mean, you look at USC and what Lincoln Riley's done with some transfer portal guys. And the two big ones are obviously Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison. Everybody's slapping Lincoln Riley on the back about, what a great year he's having. If he didn't have Caleb Williams, he is not having a great year. I don't care what you say. Caleb Williams is the catalyst for that team. Eddie got him through the portal, right? The NCAA transfer portal website keeps track of some statistics, and here's some pretty interesting ones I saw. when I was kind of looking through that. First of all, they only keep these statistics so far. Just 2020 is when they started. So there's really only 2 years worth of statistics. Some of this stuff may change over time. 2-1 portal entrants or undergrad players, which that kind of makes sense. There's not a lot of kids that graduate early in college and still have eligibility to be a grad transfer type player. Which, by the way, I think that was probably another one of the initial intents of the transfer portal, was for those guys that want to, they went and did their undergrad at school A, and school B over there really has a great program for what they want to do for graduate study. This gives them the opportunity to still play out their eligibility in football, but also, pursue their academic goals. Which, let's not forget, that's what college football is. Should be. Used to be. One of the questions I've always had about the transfer portal was, does it work for everybody? Are these guys, when they enter, are they going to school somewhere else? Here's some interesting statistics on that. Over the course of 2020 and 2021, 41% of those, and this is just football. You can go break it down by all the other sports. You can actually select all sports, or you can select individual sports as you kind of look at these numbers. So this is just FBS. 41% of the players that have entered the transfer portal since 2020 still looking for a new school. That's almost half. 2020, I thought, well, maybe 2021 guys, and also what it does is it breaks it down by month. So it's kind of cool to see the different months that these guys. Spring is pretty heavy. Oddly enough, I would have thought like right after the season, but there's a lot of guys that enter the portal in spring. Anyway, I thought 2021. Obviously, there's we've got the football season still going. The portal's not open right now, so everybody that's in the portal from 2021 entered the portal before football season. So I thought maybe that skews it a little bit, but oddly enough, 2020, there's 43% of those guys. So of all the guys in 2020 that entered the portal, 43% still don't have a school. Another interesting sort of stat or figure is those that are aided by the departing school, so the school I'm leaving, if they help me find another school, I'm twice as likely to find another school. And that makes sense, right? But that all kind of goes back to what's the school's responsibility? What's the losing program's responsibility in finding you a new school? And it's something that's not regulated in this rule that I'm aware of at all. A good person, a good coach, a good organization is going to want to help people. I do it all the time. Like I hire people. I manage people. And when someone comes to me and says, hey, I want to make a career change. I want to move to this type of role within the company. Can you help me? I help them, even though I'm going to lose them. And a lot of them are really good people. They're really vital to what we do in my department. But I'm not going to hold people back. I'm going to try to help them. And so there's a lot of good people that'll do that. But there's other coaches that'll be like, dude, if you're leaving me, good luck. So there are obviously certain consequences of entering the transfer portal. You might not ever find another program to go play at. And so I think the gamble for players is, especially those that aren't stars, does anybody else even know who I am? And just because you had 5 offers out of high school doesn't mean those other 4 programs care about you whatsoever. So these guys that have scholarships, they're gambling with their scholarship. They're gambling with their academic future, their ability to pay for a college education, hoping that they can go somewhere else. And a lot like a lot of political policies, and I don't want to get political on everybody, but a lot like political policies, you solve one problem, you create a lot of other problems. Now you got guys that 43% of the class of 2020 that entered the portal in 2020. They're not at another school right now, at least not playing football. And I don't know how they measure that. I may dig into that some more. Maybe it's they're not at school, period, or maybe it's they're just not with a football program anymore. I don't know if they track it that well, but let's assume they're not in school. So almost half of the guys that entered that portal in 2020, they're not in school anymore, and that's a problem. I think if you do end up landing somewhere, you're probably schematically behind, unless you follow a coach. Like Caleb Williams followed Lincoln Riley, so he knew the system. He's not behind, in his development of the scheme, his understanding of the scheme, and his role on the team. That's rare. There's not a lot of guys that do that. Most of these guys are leaving and they're going someplace new, and they're going to have new coaches, and they're already behind. A guy that's been at Florida for 2 years, let's say he's a redshirt freshman. He goes to Florida State. He transfers out and goes to Florida State. He's already behind an early enrollee come fall camp time. Schematically. What about physical development? What about, these guys are spending all this time and effort trying to find a new school. It's probably hard for them to focus on themselves physically. So you're losing your place in line from a knowledge perspective, but you could be losing your place in line physically. And then I think the other question is there a stigma? Is there going to start to be a stigma associated with these players, especially really young players that enter the portal? One example, and again, it's a Texas example because that's the team I'm obviously the most familiar with, but Jaleel Billingsley, Alabama guy, played 2 years there. Whatever's going on at Alabama is not suiting him, so he says, I'm going into the portal. Texas picks him up. He didn't play a whole season. He quit on the team. He's back in the portal, or he will be back in the portal on Monday. Is anybody going to pick that guy up? I mean, surely somebody will, but the point being, for certain players, do you get stigmatized for using the portal more than once? Does that make you one of those 43% of guys that just can't find a spot to go to school anymore? So I think the portal obviously can be a good thing for a lot of guys. But I think it's sort of built this false sense of free agency that really doesn't exist. Big news yesterday or the day before, sometime this week. College football playoff expansion is going to move to 12 teams in 2024. Quarterfinal games for the first year are going to be played at the higher seeds home site or a site that they select. So I guess there's the possibility that someone could say, we don't want a home game. We want to make it easier on the visiting team. So let's travel and do a neutral site thing. I don't know about that. I think you're going to see every single quarterfinal game be at the higher seeds home field, unless there's a construction problem or the like. Then in 2025, they're going to move to the major bowls. And there's a list of the bowls. I don't have them written down in front of me. But like the big New Year's 6 type bowls, they'll have the quarterfinals. And then someone asked pretty directly about 2026, and I think they're keeping their option open, and they're going to see which one they feel like is better. So I think it's cool that they're expanding to 12. 4 was great because we didn't have anything before, but I think 12 is better. I think it makes it more equitable. I think what you were seeing with 4 teams is it was the same 4 teams basically every single time. And when the same 4 teams go to the playoffs every single year, it's easier for those same 4 teams to recruit the best players in the country. What Florida and Alabama have done from a recruiting perspective the last few years during this whole college football playoff is insane. I don't have the exact statistics, but it is a huge number of 5 stars. A huge percentage of 5-star players over the last few years have been split up between those two teams. An unusually high percentage. Now you're going to have more teams in it. You're going to have more teams getting exposed to it. Even that playing field a little bit recruiting-wise, money-wise, which leads to facilities, NIL. I think it's good for the support, it's good for the sport. But there's, just like anything good, there's problems with it, right? Instead of arguing about who's 5th and 6th, now we're going to be arguing about who's 12th, 13th. You know, those teams are all going to have something to say about where they're ranked. I think the big question for the 12-team college football playoff is, and there's a couple of really good examples to kind of illustrate this question, or this example, is what do you do with the teams that lose their conference championship games? So you got K-State and Utah right now. They're both 9-3. They're sitting at 10th and 11th in the country. So if the 12-team playoff went down now, they'd probably be in the 12-team playoff. And I'll throw a caveat out there. I've heard, I don't know exactly how they're going to handle it. I've heard there's like 6, you're in because you're a Power 5 conference champion, and then the rest of them are kind of at large bids. My assumption would be, though, that generally speaking, obviously those 6 schools are in the top 12, and I think the other 6 schools will kind of fall in line with who's in the top 12. There may be some discrepancy, but I think generally speaking, you'll see the top 12 teams in the final college playoff poll be the 12 teams in the 12-team playoff. So let's just make that assumption. Let's, as we discuss this. So K-State, Utah, they're currently 10th and 11th. If they go lose, they're both 9-3. What if they go lose their conference championship games? Let's say we're playing it off this year. It's 12-team playoff for the first time. They go to 9-4. You got Florida State, LSU, Oregon State, Oregon, and UCLA sitting at 13th through 17th, and they're all 9-3 teams. Does the fact that K-State and Utah lost the last game of their season, does that bump them down below those teams? Does the committee look at that and say it's irrelevant? We're not even going to look at the conference championship games except for seeding anymore? In other words, once the final regular season game is done, is that college football playoff ranking, is that the ranking that they use to say these are the 12 teams regardless? Or does the college football playoff committee have a huge problem on their hands because there's 5 teams that are now 9-3, and you got 2 spots to put those 5 teams because K-State and Utah are both 9-4 now and lost their last game of the season? I think it's going to be really cool to see how a lot of that stuff pans out. I don't follow Division I AA that closely. I know they have a playoff. I know it's a big playoff. I don't know if they run into these types of issues and how that stuff is solved, how those problems are solved. But I thought that was a pretty cool question. How does that work? Do you get penalized for being in your conference championship game and losing to one of the best teams in the country? Does it help you? Or does the committee just completely eliminate that even being a factor by changing the timing of the final college football playoff rankings? I don't know. What do you guys think? Subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about the podcast. You can check it out on YouTube. This video will be up. Horn Takes Podcast. Find me on TikTok at Horn Takes Podcast. You can email me, horntakespodcast@gmail.com. Questions, comments, concerns, criticisms. I like them all. You guys have a good one.